We all are live.
Hi everyone, we welcome you all to the fourth webinar of our webinar series. Today, the session is on Law on Dying Declaration and Criminal Revision. Our intent, like always, remains the same, to bring practical insight on the topic, on the subject, to share experience of our eminent speakers with all of you. And that's really the intent of our bar. Today, we are extremely excited and privileged that we have been joined by Senior Advocate Ashok Kumar Singh ji. Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar.
We welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much.
We are also pleased that we have been joined by Advocate Bharat Bhushan ji. Namaskar, sir. We welcome you, sir. We are also pleased with the presence of Advocate Arun Sharma ji, President, Rouse Avenue Court Bar Association. Namaskar, sir. We are also pleased that we have been joined by Siddharth ji, Secretary, Rouse Avenue Bar Association. Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar, Sakshi ma'am. Namaskar.
We're also pleased that we have been joined by Advocate Sunil Kumar ji, convener of the law webinar session. Namaskar, sir. We know that there is a lot of negative atmosphere all around. If we look it into the Twitter page, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, news channel, everywhere one thing is common. When this COVID-19 will go away? Is it there for decades? When the things will resume? When we will be normal? There is so much negativity in our minds. And the association at this time has created a light of knowledge, a light of positivity by creating such a great platform for all of us, where we have the opportunity to learn from the experience and expertise of our speakers. I congratulate Bar Association for creating such a great and knowledgeable platform for all of us. With this note, I'll request Arun sir to please tell us something about the association. So please.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for giving this opportunity to me. First of all, good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible?
Very much audible.
Very much. Good afternoon, sir. Sorry, I could join late. Good afternoon to Senior Advocate Sri Bharat Bhushan ji and all the other viewer of this webinar. Sir, Rouse Avenue Court Bar Association has been founded recently after opening this court, as you are very well aware. We pleased that the Bar Association has taken this initiative for organizing this FIR in association with the Bharat and Associates. I extend a very warm regard for Bharat sir also. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Particularly at this juncture, when the court are not functioning as usual way. Sir, Bar Association has a quite number of young advocates, and because of your able guidance, definitely they are sharpen their knowledge, their skills. As you have already said, they are means you are providing a very good platform to our young members. Thank you, sir. We have approximate thousands of young brothers. They are poised to grow further for your kind support. I welcome Sri A.K. Singh ji, who is very seasoned lawyer, who is very renowned lawyer, who is in practice more than approximate 40 years. Now, he is well-known legal luminary. He has been the member of Expert Committee of Information Technology Act, constituted by Ministry of Communication and Information Technology. He is also a standing counsel in Supreme Court of India, Housing and Urban Development Corporation. इनका जितना बायोडाटा है जो मेरे को मिला है, सर मैं बता रहा हूँ, वास्तव में ऐसी खुशी होती है कि कम समय में इतना ज्यादा अचीवमेंट बहुत ही रेयर लोग कर पाते हैं। ये बड़े भाई की तरह मुझे प्यार करते हैं, आशीर्वाद देते हैं, और मैं इन्हें अपना राम मानता हूँ और इनका लक्ष्मण रहना चाहता हूँ हमेशा। यंगस्टर्स को जितना सपोर्ट, जितना अफेक्शन भाई साहब प्रोवाइड करते हैं, वास्तव में बेहद अप्रिशिएबल है। सर आपका गाइडेंस जो है हमेशा सराहनीय रहेगा। सर आपने जितनी उपलब्धि, जितना अचीवमेंट जितने कम समय में किया है, वास्तव में बहुत ही रेयर एडवोकेट कर पाते। सर कोविड के समय पे भी आपने जितनी हेल्प यंगस्टर्स की है, उनको चाहे किसी क्षेत्र में एडवाइस करने की है, सलाह करने की है, उनका मैटर डिफेंड करने की है, या फाइनेंशियल असिस्टेंस है, वी नेवर फॉरगेट योर कोऑपरेशन। सर बार एसोसिएशन हमेशा कभी भी आपको भूलेगी नहीं और हमेशा हर प्लेटफॉर्म पे आपका रिगार्ड और आपका सम्मान करेगी। हम जितना सम्मान आप डिजर्व करते हैं, मैं मानता हूं, बीइंग हेड ऑफ दिस बार, बीइंग प्रेसिडेंट ऑफ दिस बार, मैं अपनी पूरी एसोसिएशन की तरफ से ये अश्योर करता हूं आपको, हर मोमेंट पे, हर समय पे हम आपका कोऑपरेशन चाहते रहेंगे और आपका सम्मान देते रहेंगे। थैंक यू सर।
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
And kudos to Rouse Avenue Bar Association for creating such a great platform, sir. Now, I'll request Sunil, sir, to please tell us something about the initiative taken by the association and the law webinar series. So, please. Sunil, sir?
सर अनम्यूट कर ले प्लीज।
Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Shakshi ji. Good evening, everybody. Once again, with a strong desire to make best of the current times for our younger colleagues, we at Rouse Avenue Bar Association come up with a series of webinars, which we believe is helping our members to learn on various relevant subject matters. So far, the effort has been well received by our colleagues, and I believe that our continued efforts will further add to the knowledge pool of our young colleagues. For our legal fraternity, knowledge remains the main and pivotal investment for future. Accordingly, my dear friends, we have 3 more sessions planned that we are now on every Saturday, that is on 29th August, 5th September, and on 12th September, wherein we are inviting legal luminaries, our speakers, to share their experience and subject knowledge on such relevant subject matters, which remains useful for all our young members in day-to-day practice. We believe that this will go a long way in learning from experienced luminaries for our young members. And we are also pleased with the response that we have been receiving for this effort, and will continue to serve our fraternity in all the ways possible. I would like to thank Bharat Bhushan ji, whose idea has come into the picture, into the field. And I would also like to thank Mr. A.K. Singh ji, senior advocate, who has always been a guiding force to us. And I also second the thoughts of Arun Sharma ji, that Singh Saab has always been very cooperative and supportive to the younger generation of our lawyers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I'll request Siddharth ji to please introduce our speakers.
Thank you, ma'am. I welcome to all who are watching our webinar through YouTube or Facebook Live. Welcome to all. First of all, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Ashok Kumar Singh ji, who is a senior advocate who has been at bar for more than 40 years now. He is a well-known legal luminary. He has been member of expert committee on Information Technology Act, constituted by Ministry of Communications and Information Technology. He is also standing counsel in Supreme Court of India for Housing and Urban Development Corporation, National Internet Exchange of India, Kendriya Vidyalaya Sangathan. He is also special PP for CBI. He is also known for his international assignments, as he has been engaged by various international companies as counsel and for advisory matters. He is also an arbitrator and is on panel with National Internet Exchange of India, Indian Council of Arbitration, IIAM, and many more. Throughout his, throughout his career, he has worked for the betterment of our legal fraternity. With this short introduction, I heartily welcome Sri Ashok Kumar Singh ji. Sir, namaskar. Our second speaker, Advocate Sri Bharat Bhushan, who last time spoken on PC Act. I am pleased to share with you all that he has been a litigating lawyer for last more than 20 years and has represented clients before various trial courts and high courts of India. He has also represented his clients in the infamous case of Tehelka sting operation and many more such cases, which were under the erstwhile Prevention of Corruption Act. He has been for years representing his clients in various white-collar crimes under Prevention of Corruption Act and other similar provisions. Through these years, he is known in his close circle to have understood the nerve of being a defense lawyer on these matters. Besides this, his firm is on panel with various multinational, and he is also on advisory board with many companies. As said by Sunil ji, with everybody's contribution, this series has been brought forward, and it is particularly the support from senior advocate Sri Ashok Kumar Singh ji and seasoned advocate Sri Bharat Bhushan, and technical support from the team has been instrumentally in doing this program. We thank them all. Please, Sakshi, carry on now.
Thank you so much, sir. So, the first topic for today's session is dying declaration. So, as the name suggests, declaration, a statement given by the person who's about to die. So, any statement given by a person who's dying can be termed as dying declaration, or there has to be some essential ingredients to put the statement within the ambit of dying declaration. Is there any provision that dying declaration, any statement which is termed as dying declaration, can be said that no, this is not dying declaration and can be rejected, can be challenged? So how the statement should be? It should be in written form, verbal form, question answer form, should be in gestures, or it can be anything, should be signed. So when we think of dying declaration, when we look upon to this topic, one question that comes to our mind is, the person is dead. We cannot call the person. We cannot cross-examine the person. Then why this statement is considered so important? Why so much importance is given to this statement? Is it because it is based on a presumption? वो कहते हैं ना, मरने वाला बंदा कभी झूठ नहीं बोलता. The person who's about to die never lies. Is this based upon this presumption or any other presumption? We'll just get to know all of these things. Sir will today declutter the law for all of us. So I'll not waste any more time, and I'll invite Sir to please put light on this subject. Over to you, Sir.
Thank you, Sakshi. Good evening, friends. On Sunday evening, when everyone wants to enjoy the life with the family, we are encroaching upon the time of the lawyer friends, and that is too on a legal subject, dying declaration, which is considered to be a little boring subject. Normally, for a lawyer, every subject is boring unless until he is paid. But nevertheless, I will try to make efforts to make this subject a little interesting. Sakshi very rightly said, what is dying declaration? What an ordinary prudent man consider about dying declaration? Dying declaration means obviously a statement given by a dying person. But every statement which is given by a dying person is dying declaration? No. Section 32(1) of the Indian Evidence Act has given the parameters for dying declaration. It says that a statement made by the deceased prior to his death about the cause of the death or any of the circumstances of the transaction resulted in his death is relevant. When it is relevant? When his death is in question in any proceedings. Thus, what are the parameters which are given by 32(1)? Number 1, it should be made by the deceased. Number 2, a statement should relate to the cause of his death. Number 3, in case it is not for cause of death, it should relate to the circumstances of transaction resulted in his death. And number 4, his death must be in question in a proceedings, then that statement is admissible, otherwise it is not admissible. Section 32(1) doesn't say and doesn't require that the victim should make the statement in expectation of death. It says the statement given before death. So any statement which is given before death and when his death is in question and it relates and fulfills the requirement 32(1), it will be a dying declaration. Section 32(1) refers to two expressions, and they are very important expressions. One is the cause of his death, and secondly, the circumstances of the transaction which resulted in his death. These two expressions are different expressions. Cause of his death is very clear. I need not to spend time on it. But circumstances of the transaction which resulted in his death, it is very important. It does not mean cause the death. The expression, any of the circumstances which resulted in his death are much wider. They include the statements which has a nexus with the death, number 1. Number 2, what is to be seen by us that the statement may be distant or near, but in any case, it must give us an idea about the part of circumstances which was played for bringing the death of the person who has made the statement. One important aspect which everyone should always keep in mind, that the statement given must have direct and organic relationship between the death and the circumstances of the transaction which resulted in death. The question arises, does the general expressions like fear or suspicion would come within this? A person before his death might have lodged a report in the police station that he has fear from ABCD, or he apprehends that ABCD, any person, he might attack on him. Can these statements be taken as dying declaration? Answer is no, because they have no relation with the cause of death or the circumstances of the transaction which resulted in death. I give few examples to understand it again. A went to recover his money from B. Before going, he spoke to his wife and informed her that B had called him and assured that today he would give the money. A was found dead. The statement given by A to wife before leaving the place was found by the court as a dying declaration. Secondly, we see in matrimonial cases, the young ladies, they commit suicide. Before her death, the letters which such young ladies write to their parents about their bad position in the matrimonial home, they have also been taken to be the dying declaration. Number 3, A shouts, he is on the top of his house, that B has come with a gun. And suddenly a fire is shot, A dies, but B is not seen by anyone. But A's last shout, where he has taken the name of B, it was considered as a dying declaration by the Supreme Court in a very famous case of Ratan Singh versus State of HP, which was decided in 1997 by Supreme Court. Now, dying declaration as per 32(1) can be oral and in writing. It is material and can be used either in homicide or in suicide. But what is required? It must be given by the deceased when he was in fit state of mind. That is most important thing. He must be conscious of the facts which he is going to disclose, of his deeds and the consequences. If he is conscious enough, then the dying declaration is valuable and can be true and trustworthy. Now, another question which normally arises in Evidence Act, oral evidence, hearsay evidence has no value. What is the position of dying declaration? The person who has given the dying declaration is not available. His statement is hearsay. Is it an exception to the rule of hearsay? Yes. Dying declaration is an exception to the rule of hearsay evidence. Section 32 and 33 of the Evidence Act both are exception to the rule of hearsay, and dying declaration being part of 32(1) is thus also an exception. Another important aspect of Evidence Act is that if a person has given a statement but he is not available for cross-examination, then his statement is normally not admissible. Here the maker of dying declaration is not available. Whether such dying declaration is admissible in evidence or it is also a rule of exception, yes, it is also a rule of exception that if the maker is not cross-examined, even then it is admissible in evidence. This is the only statement which is admissible in both the cases in exception to the basic rule of Evidence Act. And a very right question the Sakshi has posed, what is important? Why this dying declaration is so taken true? The basic principle is, and the basic thought is, that a person who is going to die and who is going to his maker will never go to his maker with a lie on his lips. In other words, a person dying would definitely like to make whatever is correct at the words of his death. The special sanctity is given as at the solemn moment when he knows he is going to die. It is not expected that he will make an untrue statement. The Honorable Supreme Court, in a very known case of Narayan Singh versus State of Haryana, decided in the year 2004, Supreme Court 1616 has given a very good description of it. Supreme Court says the shadow of impending death by itself guarantee of truth by the statement of the deceased regarding circumstances leading to his death. So shadow of impending death, it is a guarantee that he is not going to make a wrong statement. Suppose a person who is not expecting the death at the time when the statement was given, he gave the statement and after some time he dies. Would it be taken in a dying declaration? Yes. Here, the difference is between English law and Indian law. Indian law says a statement given before death would be treated a dying declaration, provided parameters of section 32(1) are fulfilled. But in English law, a statement given at the verge of death, when the death is imminent, only at that point of time, it is admissible. So here, in Indian law, even if a statement is given, and a statement when given, there was no chance of a person to die, but it fulfills the parameter of 32(1), it gives all the information, and his death is in question, it will be taken as a dying declaration. After all this, now a normal question arises, who can? A normal question arises, who can record this statement? Should there be some specific persons? Answer is no. The statement can be recorded by the magistrate. It can be recorded if magistrate is not available by the investigating officer or the police officer present or the doctor or even a piano public or even the family members. It depends on the health condition of the maker, whether he would survive to give the statement to magistrate. In case he doesn't, and chances are that he might not survive, then it can be recorded by anyone. But requirement is that the dying declaration, when it is made, the person must be in fit state of mind. It is not statutorily required that the statement must be given before the magistrate or before a particular person. Even the dying declaration made to the parents and was then found to be true, trustworthy and voluntary was accepted by the Supreme Court in the case of Jaswant Singh versus State, AIR 1979, Supreme Court 190. It is a basic case and was followed subsequently by other judgments of the Supreme Court. Now, we have used time and again the word fit for statement. Does it mean that there should be a medical certificate to show that the deceased was fit to give the statement? Is it necessary? No, it is not necessary. It is rule of caution. If it is there, it should be placed on record. But suppose there is no chance to go to the doctor or to go to the hospital, prior to that he dies and he wants to give a statement, that statement would also be admissible in evidence. What is more important is that the prosecution must prove that the dying declaration which was given and which is produced by the prosecution, it creates trust in the mind of the court, and even in the absence of medical certificate, if it is the judge finds that the dying declaration is true and voluntary, it can be accepted. It happens in the case of Sher Singh versus State of Punjab. Supreme Court in 2008, while delivering this judgment, held that doctor's certificate is a rule of caution, but it is not must. Now we come to another aspect of it. Whether the dying declaration should be in a question and answer form, a general question normally asked. Again, answer is it is not. It is also a rule of caution that it should be in question and answer form. In the case of Ram Bihari Yadav versus State, decided in the year 1998 by the Honorable Supreme Court, they said that it would be better that it should be in question and answer form. But the statements which were recorded, not in question and answer form, were also upheld by the Supreme Court in the case of State of UP versus Amir Ali, decided in the year 1996, and Ganpat versus State, decided in the year 1993. Now we said that dying declaration can be oral and writing. What is the position for oral dying declaration? Then any Tom and Harry can come in court and say that I have heard the dying declaration and I want to give the evidence for that. How to test oral dying declaration? It was made clear by the Honorable Supreme Court that when oral dying declaration is there, it requires more scrutiny than other dying declaration. Reason being that there is nothing on writing and there is no supporting evidence. What is to be looked into, that the oral dying declaration should be strictly in the wordings of the deceased. There should not be any addition, there should not be any subtraction, there should not be bad intention of the person to whom it is given. Number two, to whom it is given. The person must be trustworthy. He should not be a man of police, he should not be a man of complainant, he should not be a man of accused. He should be an independent person. Then, if it is found that yes, he is an independent person, he is trustworthy, and his dying declaration is virtually in the exact wording of the disease, which is corroborated by other evidence, such dying declaration can also be accepted. It was held in Darshanath Devi versus State in a judgment passed by Supreme Court in the year 1996. We must understand one thing very clearly, that dying declaration is a special type of evidence. This is the evidence which can be relied upon for conviction of the accused even without any corroboration. Simple dying declaration, if it is proved to be true, voluntary and trustworthy, can hang a man. When it is the position, then what is there for the courts to examine and to find out how this declaration can be treated as true and trustworthy. This issue came in a known judgment of K. Ramachandra Reddy versus public prosecutor in the year 1976, and this judgment is followed regularly by the Supreme Court till date. The Supreme Court has given 4 principles for it. Supreme Court has said that the court must examine, number 1, that the disease was not tutored before giving the dying declaration. I'm again repeating, he must not be tutored before giving the dying declaration. Number 2, there should not be anyone who is prompting while he is giving dying declaration. So it is to be seen, there is no tutoring, there is no prompting. Thirdly, what happens when the disease is under medical treatment, under the influence of medicines, sometimes imagination starts. It is also to be ensured that dying declaration is not out of imagination of the diseased. And fourthly, the disease was in a fit state of mind. If these 4 ingredients are fulfilled, then the dying declaration may be considered as true and trustworthy. But to fulfill these 4 ingredients, the court has to scrutinize each and every evidence very carefully, all corroborating evidence, all doctors' evidence, all police officers' evidence, and the persons who were present at the time of dying declaration. Now, after this basic concept about dying declaration, I will take you to certain unique examples and unique situations where the dying declaration was either accepted or rejected by the court. If there is a suspicion about dying declaration, what the court should do? There is a dying declaration, nobody denies about it. Dying declaration appears to be correct, but there is some suspicion. Then the court says that unless until, Supreme Court says unless until such dying declaration is corroborated by other evidences, it should not be taken into consideration. If the other evidence corroborate and the confidence Supreme Court finds, the courts find in the dying declaration, it can be relied upon. It was held in the Rashid Beg versus State of MP in the year 1974, and this judgment is also followed till date by the Supreme Court. Now, another position is the court gets the dying declaration, but there is infirmity in the dying declaration. What is the infirmity? Paper is spoiled, maybe in connivance with the accused, or ink is thrown on the paper, maybe in the connivance with the accused or anyone, or it is shown that it is eaten by the white ants or by the rats. Now, under these circumstances, it is to be seen by the court whether the remaining portion gives the information which is enough to meet out the fundamentals of section 32(1) of the Evidence Act or not. If it gives the complete information which come within the parameters given in section 32(1), then this done declaration can be looked into, otherwise it is liable to be discarded. Other situation arise when the done declaration is recorded by prosecution, the police produce it before the court. It is one of the most important document of prosecution, but the eyewitnesses are coming forward and making a statement that at the relevant point of time, the deceased was unconscious. Now, it was a very difficult situation to analyze. Under these circumstances, entire evidence of the corroborating witnesses was examined by the Supreme Court in an appeal, and looking into the consistency of the witnesses on material aspect, Supreme Court relied upon the oral evidence which was produced by the prosecution. They were also prosecution witnesses, and then declaration was declined in the case of Kaki Singh versus the state of MP, which was decided by the Supreme Court in the year 1981. Now there is another situation. It might happen that there may be conflict about the medical evidence and the oral evidence. The medical evidence says that the disease was under the influence of medicines, while the oral evidence consistently said, no, he was not in the influence of anything. Even if he was in the influence of the medicines, he was fit to give the statement, number one. Number two, he was fully conscious. Number three, he could understand what is going to be wrong and what is going to be right out of his statement. After examining all the witnesses and the medical evidence produced by the doctor, Supreme Court relied upon the oral evidence. There was consistency in the oral evidence and decided that this done declaration can be relied upon in a case which was decided in the year 1988. Now, another situation arises when the done declaration is very short, 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines. What to do? This aspect came in the case of Suraj Bihar, where time and again it was argued that it is too small and it can be relied upon. Supreme Court again held, and after examining it, Supreme Court found that this done declaration cannot be discarded because what is required under 32(1) is about the cause of his death. If he has given the cause of his death, even in 3 lines, or 2 lines, or 4 lines, and other formal questions have not been replied, or other formal questions have not been considered, or reply has not come, it does not make any difference. We have to see the material evidence available in the done declaration. What is the material produced by the man who had given the done declaration in these 2, 3, 4 lines? If it is enough and come within the 4 corners of 32(1), then done declaration is admissible and can be relied upon. And in this case also, the done declaration was accepted by the Honorable Apex Court. And a similar situation in state of Maharashtra versus Krishnamurthy, the same short done declaration was also accepted by the Supreme Court. Now another situation arises. Prosecution story says totally something different, and done declaration says totally different. Both are apart. What the court should do? Supreme Court says under these circumstances, done declaration cannot be relied upon because it does not support to the prosecution story. Now I come to another situation when there are multiple. Nowadays we are finding multiple done declarations coming in the criminal cases. Done declaration, because people now understand the value of done declaration, and they come forward, sir, I received the done declaration, or before that he made the done declaration to me. Then declaration to the parents, then declaration to family members, then declaration to police, then declaration to magistrate and to doctor. When there are multiple time declaration, what the court should do? In Mohanlal versus State of Maharashtra, in 1982, Supreme Court decided that the court should look into first declaration. But when the law developed, then the views changed. When the views changed, then in 2008, in Amol Singh versus State of MP, Supreme Court decided this is incorrect. We should examine, the court should examine all the time declarations, not only the first one, and to test them whether they are within the four corners or parameters of section of the evidence of the 32(1) of the Evidence Act. If any one of them fulfills the test, then that is to be considered. It is not that out of four you consider number one, and after discard others. No, you have to look into all, and you have to scrutinize them all, and you have to find out which of them is trustworthy. If all of them are not trustworthy, you can discard them. If any one of them is trustworthy, it can be relied upon. And this judgment of 2008 is now again reconfirmed in 2019 in the latest judgment of Jasveer Singh versus State, passed by the Honorable Supreme Court on 4th September 2019. And now I am coming to another situation when the time declaration is recorded and it is lost. There is evidence that it was recorded. Eyewitnesses says that it was recorded. Case diary says it was recorded, but it is not available. What to do? The time declaration, whenever is recorded, normally investigating officer also make entry of it, and in the same language. If that entry is proved, an investigating officer comes forward and says, and his statement is trustworthy, that this declaration was recorded by me but unfortunately lost, then that entry can be relied upon. But if the investigating officer doesn't turn up and simply entry is produced, what is the position? In case of Ram Bihari Yadav versus State, Supreme Court under these circumstances declined to accept the declaration. They said that you have produced the case diary, but the person who has recorded the case diary, he must come in the witness box and prove it, that it was virtually the language and the wordings of the deceased. Now another situation arises. Take another case that a person gives a time declaration. There is imminent danger to his life. Then declaration is recorded. Luckily, he is saved. He doesn't die. Then what is the value of this time declaration? Would it be in the 32(1) or other provision of law? It cannot be time declaration under section 32(1) of the Evidence Act. However, such a statement can be accepted and looked into by the court under section 157 of the Evidence Act as the corroboratory evidence. Supreme Court, when this issue was raised and the prosecution wanted to rely upon it as a time declaration, Supreme Court says so, no, there is no time declaration, it is only corroboratory evidence. And this happened in the case of Gajula Surya versus State of AP, passed by Supreme Court in 2010. Now, there may be a case where the deceased was unable to speak. The throat is slit. The accused persons, he or she can't speak. Recently, we have seen in the case of Nirbhaya, a time declaration was recorded in a similar manner when she was unable to speak. The first case on this aspect came, there was a Queen Emperor versus Abdullah. And the issue arose when a person can't speak, whether a time declaration can be given by the virtue of signs or gestures, and the court held yes, it can be given. But there are certain parameters and certain guidelines which have been issued by the apex court in the recent judgment of Nibra, where the Supreme Court has said that what is more important is that in any case, the court must examine that the person who is recording the statement, does he know the sign language or the gestures? Number. So importance of the person who is recording becomes very, very important, especially in such cases. Number two, what questions that person has asked to the deceased. Number three, whether these questions were simple or complicated. Could the deceased understand those questions and give us the reply of it? Could the deceased was in a position to explain, or after understanding, explain in the reply by gestures or signs? Thirdly, we have to look into, the court has to look into, after seeing the questions and the reply, whether the reply given by the deceased by sign or gestures were clear and understandable. So a dying declaration can be given by signs and gestures, but these four guidelines which were given by Supreme Court must look into before admitting it in evidence. Now another situation arises, a person giving a dying declaration, only one line is written or two lines is written and he dies. What to do? Then the same principle which applies for a short dying declaration would also be applied over here. It is to be seen whether in that 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines, what is required under section 32(1), those parameters have been fulfilled or not. If some formal questions have been left, that dying declaration can be considered. If only formal questions have been asked, then that dying declaration has got no value at all. As we discussed earlier, that the letters written by the deceased before committing suicide to the parents was considered as dying declaration. Similarly, the diaries which were found in possession of the deceased from the room of the deceased and which reflected about her mental condition and the circumstances under which she committed suicide was also considered and found to be admissible by the Supreme Court under section 32(1) of the Evidence Act. Normally, a dying declaration with a thumb mark is acceptable. After all, there will be either signature or a thumb mark. But once a person was found to be 100% burned, he had 100% burn injury, and a dying declaration was produced with a thumb mark, it was rejected by the Honorable Supreme Court. Now another question arises, a situation arises that a person goes to police station, lost the FIR. He is fit and fine, doesn't look that he will die. There is no steps were taken by the police officers to record his dying declaration. He was sent for the medical examination to the hospital where he suddenly dies, collapses. Whether FIR can be treated as a dying declaration because it is the only first information report. Supreme Court says no. The moment the statement is recorded as FIR and the person thereafter dies, it would come within the 4 corners of section 32(1) as all ingredients of 32(1) were fulfilled. He had given all information about the cause of his death, and as such, FIR recorded was considered and found to be a dying declaration in 2 cases which I could find out: Munna Raja versus State of MP and K. Ramchandra Reddy versus Public Prosecutor. Besides FIR, we forget FIR. What happened? An injured gets an injury. Instead of going to police station, he goes to the hospital. And hospital MLC is recorded. While a doctor records MLC, then he also asks the history. What is the reason of injury? In the history, he gives the history that he was beaten by such and such person, he caused such and such injury, and he gives the name of such and such person. Before the matter could be reported to police, or before any dying declaration could be recorded either by police or by the magistrate, that man collapses. Whether MLC would be treated as a dying declaration, where the history is written by the doctor. Doctor says that I have written it in the language of the disease. Whatever he stated, I have recorded accordingly. The statement of doctor was found to be trustworthy. And under these circumstances, even the MLC, the history written on the MLC was found to be dying declaration by the court. And a peculiar circumstance came in Kerala. The disease knew only Malayalam. The magistrate could understand Malayalam but could not write Malayalam. So questions were asked, but the reply was written. Question and reply were written in English language, and that declaration was challenged in Supreme Court, up to Supreme Court, by the accused persons. Their arguments were, yes, sir, it is not in the language of the disease because disease never knew English language, and the magistrate ought to have called someone who knew the Malayalam language. However, after looking into the entire evidence of the magistrate, and considering that there was no occasion for the magistrate to falsely implicate the accused, and the wordings of the dying declaration would show that it was true and trustworthy and voluntary, the Supreme Court did not uphold this objection and upheld the dying declaration and convicted the accused. These are some few examples, typical examples, which I have given you about the dying declaration, which were accepted or which were rejected by Supreme Court from time to time. Now, a normal question arises whether any direction or any guidelines have been issued to the magistrate concerned or to the session judge concerned to look into the dying declaration. Has it been done? Yes. Since 1958, there are certain guidelines which have been issued by the courts from time to time. The first time it was issued in Kushal Rao versus State of Bombay. Now these guidelines modified and given in the latest judgment passed by the Honorable Supreme Court on 7th January 2020, this year, January, in Purushottam Chabra and another versus State of NCT. Judgment was given by Justice Khanvilkar and Justice Dinesh Maheshwari. The guidelines which are given, I am just reading them. The dying declaration must evokes full self-assurance. It is very important. The moment the judge reads dying declaration, he should understand, yes, this is dying declaration which is given by a person who is dying and it is not manipulated. And with experience, one gets such sense of understanding. Secondly, there should not be any opportunity of tutoring and prompting. It must be ensured by the judge concerned. Thirdly, medical doctor attending deceased should point out the healthy state of mind if he is available. Fourthly, magistrate should normally record the dying declaration. The word is normally. However, a statement recorded by police officer or doctor may also be accepted if circumstances were such serious that there was no other alternative left for them to do it. Supreme Court said, if it satisfies all the requirement of judicial scrutiny, dying declaration, it cannot be discarded only because of the reason that it has not been recorded by the magistrate or attested by the persons present there or doesn't have the medical certificate. So the gap is left over. Now discussion is left with the court. You have to look into it. Even if there is, yes, these are guidelines which should be followed if possible. If they are not possible, then even it is not that the dying declaration should be discarded. If after judicial scrutiny, the magistrate or judge is coming to the conclusion, the session judge is coming to the conclusion that it can be relied upon, then under these circumstances, it can be admitted. And lastly, the dying declaration preferably be in question and answer form, and very important, answers should be as far as possible in the language of maker. It should not be, something should not be added. I am again repeating, something should not be subtracted. Whatever the maker is giving, whatever the disease is saying, it should come as it is in the dying declaration. So this is the latest in 2020 judgment where these guidelines have been issued. Now, after discussing that, yes, guidelines are for the judges, guidelines are for everyone, why the dying declaration is important, and it is an exception to certain rules. Now, another question arises, which normally comes: is there any guideline for the police officers also to record the dying declaration? After all, they are also human beings, they must be trained, they must be educated. Is there any guidelines in this regard? Yes, answer is yes. Then in that case, we will have to turn to Punjab Police Rules, Volume 3, Chapter 25. Punjab Police Rules, Volume 3, Chapter 25, Rule 25.21. It gives the guidelines to the police how to record the dying declaration. And these very good guidelines, I'm just repeating them, reading it before concluding. A dying declaration, whenever possible, be recorded by a magistrate. If magistrate is available, he must record it. Suppose magistrate is not available, what to do? Then in that situation, it should be recorded by a gazetted officer of the police. Another option is given. Even gazetted officer is not available. Suppose ACP is not available because ACP is the gazetted officer. Above SHO, all are gazetted officers. What to do? Then it should be recorded in presence of two or more independent witnesses, not related either to the accused or not related to the victim side. You record it, police can record it, but let there be two independent witnesses who are not related to anyone. There can be a situation when even this is not possible. Chances are not there to get the independent witnesses. What to do? Then further guidelines are given that when it is not possible, and chances is that the gentleman might die before giving the statement, then it should be recorded in the presence of two or more police officers. So there can be a corroboration of the dying declaration, and if it is planted or otherwise tutored, it can be in cross-examination. When the two or more police officers are present there, it can be by an intelligent lawyer, it can be got revealed that it was tutored or it was somehow not true. And next guideline is that if it is possible, the medical certificate from the doctor be taken that the disease was in a fit state of mind to give a lucid statement. Purpose is that he was in a position to give the statement and to understand its implications also. And lastly, the dying declaration, like Section 162, must be signed by the deceased. If it is done, then this dying declaration would be treated as a valid dying declaration. These are the guidelines which are for the police for recording the dying declaration. Now, to conclude in the end, I say the dying declaration is a very material piece of evidence. Simply on the basis of dying declaration, without any corroboration, an accused can be convicted. It is a special legislature and it requires special treatment both from prosecution and defense. It is the utmost duty of the prosecution to ensure, to prove that the dying declaration is true, voluntary, and trustworthy. And it is a duty of an intelligent lawyer of the defense to ensure, to show that it was tutored, it was prompted, it was false, it was untrue, untrustworthy. Thank you very much that I consumed a lot of time and took a lot of time and hope I didn't bore you much. Thanks a lot. Thanks to everyone and thanks to you and all member of this society, executive member of the society, executive committee. I am grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Singh sir. Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for sharing a lot of examples to help us understand the law. The clarity that today I think you've given is all because of the experience, the practical experience you have, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Now coming on to the second topic of today's session, revision. So when we go through the provisions of revision, it is nothing but the power of High Court and Session Court to scrutinize the order of inferior court. Now, when we look upon to this statement, it raises a lot of questions. So can the High Court and Session Court, what are the orders basically they can scrutinize? Should it be a final order? It can be an interlocutory order, or what it can be. And what actually they want to scrutinize? They want to scrutinize the legality, the credibility. So what is basically the scope that within which they can actually scrutinize the order? It also raises one more question. Then when the revisionary power is given to High Court and Session Court, so first do we have to go to the Session Court and then to the High Court, or there is a concurrent jurisdiction? It also raises one more question. Suppose it is first Session Court and then High Court. So if I file an application with the Session Court, it gets rejected. So can I go to the High Court? One more thing, in few of the cases where we really get confused, should we go for appeal or should we go for revision? Because when we look upon to those cases, there is very thin line of difference between appeal and revision. So we should not worry about all these things, because today sir will open up all these layers about the law. I'll not take much of the time, and I'll request sir to please, sir, I'll invite sir to tell us about the law, to open all the layers of this law. Sir, please, over to you.
Sakshi, we are going to deal with the topic of revisional jurisdiction in criminal law. Now, when is revision required or called for? When some order has been passed, or some finding has been returned, or sentence has been given. We will go for revision. Now, revision lies where? It lies before the Session Court as well as before High Courts. Both these courts have concurrent jurisdiction. This concurrent jurisdiction is there, but it has some difference. Powers of Session Court and powers of High Court have some difference. We will cover that. Now, Section 397 is the section which gives power of revisional jurisdiction to both the courts, to High Court as well as to the Sessions Court. It says the court has to call for the record. And Section 401 says, or the record becomes otherwise available. Section 397 does not say so. It only says it has to be called for. So Section 401 says it can be that record also which can becomes otherwise available. So Section 397 gives power to both High Court as well as Sessions Court. Section 401, in that portion, it is dealing with the powers of High Court. Section 397 lays down that whatever the powers of High Court, they are included in the powers of Session Court also. So what is the difference? So I will show you the difference in the language of Section 397 and of Section 401. Just see Section 397, calling for records to exercise powers of revision. एक बात इससे पहले कि आगे चले, ये बताना भी जरूरी है कि ये पावर है जो सुओ मोटो एक्सरसाइज हो या एप्लीकेशन पर एक्सरसाइज होगी, तो कोर्ट कैन सुओ मोटो आल्सो एक्सरसाइज. तो कोर्ट सुओ मोटो एक्सरसाइज कर सकती है, तो कुछ वजह होगी, कुछ उसके पास मटेरियल होगा, तभी सुओ मोटो एक्सरसाइज होगी. या फिर कुछ चीज अनकॉन्शियबल लगी, कहीं से पता लगी, तो रिकॉर्ड कॉल फॉर कर दिया. अब ये जो सिचुएशन है, इसमें कहां पर कौन सी कोर्ट क्या कर सकती है, ये मैं इस तरफ ये बता करके उसके बाद इसकी लैंग्वेज की तरफ ध्यान खींच रहा हूँ. The High Court or any session judge may call for and examine the record of any proceeding before an inferior criminal court situated within its or his local jurisdiction for the purpose of satisfying itself or himself as to the correctness, legality or propriety. So it begins with the court can call for a record. The High Court and Sessions Court may call for record. Right? Now, let us come to Section 401. देखिए Section 401 क्या कहता है? In case of any proceeding, the record of which has been called for. Now, it is talking of any proceeding, the record of which has been called for. भगवा लिया गया है by itself or which otherwise comes to its knowledge. Title is High Court's power. Here it is writing which otherwise comes to its knowledge. तो हाई कोर्ट की नॉलेज में अदरवाइज आ गया. The High Court may in its discretion exercise any of the powers conferred herein. तो पहली बात जो ध्यान देने की है, सेक्शन 397 वो दोनों की बात करता है, दोनों की पावर्स की बात करता है, हाई कोर्ट की और सेशन कोर्ट की. सेक्शन 401 हाई कोर्ट की पावर की बात करता है. सेक्शन 401 के अंदर बात आती है जो रिकॉर्ड कॉल फॉर किया है और विच कम्स टू इट्स नॉलेज अदरवाइज. ये विच कम्स टू इट्स नॉलेज अदरवाइज ये सेक्शन 397 में नहीं. देख, तो ये डिफरेंस जो है दोनों की पावर्स में हमको ध्यान में रखना होगा आगे की हम स्टडी करने से पहले, आगे की बात आने से पहले. तो ये एक इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट है इसका, इस सेक्शन के अंदर, इसको हमें देखना है. अब आगे कहता है ये सेक्शन 397, I had read it up to satisfy as to the correctness, legality or propriety of any finding. कौन सी तीन चीजें डील करेगा? फाइंडिंग, सेंटेंस, तीन चीजें हैं, करेक्टनेस, लीगलिटी और प्रोप्राइटी. Of any finding, sentence or order, recorded or past, and as to the regularity of any proceedings of such inferior court. तो एग्जामिन क्या करेगा? पहले तीन चीजें थी कि उसने एग्जामिन करना है करेक्टनेस, लीगलिटी और प्रोप्राइटी. दूसरी चीज जो है रेगुलरिटी है कि नहीं प्रोसीडिंग्स के अंदर, ये भी देख सकते हैं. तो इसका मतलब है ये सुपरवाइजरी पावर एक्सरसाइज हो गई. The superior courts have the power to supervise the inferior courts. वो पावर एक्सरसाइज हो रही है जब वो रेगुलरिटी भी देखेंगे, प्रोप्राइटी भी देखेंगे, प्रोसीडिंग्स की, रिकॉर्ड की. तो ये सारा चीज जब देखी जाएगी तो इसको ये सुपरवाइजरी पावर है. क्योंकि ये सुपरवाइजरी पावर है तो ये सुओ मोटो भी एक्सरसाइज हो सकती है, क्योंकि सुपरवाइजरी पावर उनके पास ऑलरेडी है. अब देखो आगे बात है, that the execution of any sentence or order be suspended. अब जब pending है revisional application या suo motu power exercise हो रही है, in that situation कोई punishment दी जा चुकी है, तो उस punishment को suspend करने की power है, यानी कि power जो section 389 के अंदर है, वो यहाँ पर दे दी गई है. And if the accused is in confinement, he may be released on bail or his own bond pending examination of the record. So ये उसके पास power है, and this power is may be exercised. It is not binding upon the court. Court can see what kind of case it is, severity क्या है case की, उसके हिसाब से decide करेगी कि ये suspension of sentence कर दिया जाए या ना किया जाए, और suspension of sentence करके उसको bail पे release कर दिया जाए या ना किया जाए. और bail पे release करना है तो surety लेनी है या उसको personal bond पे छोड़ देना है. ये सारे aspect उसके पास है. अब सेशन जज के अंडर जो है कौन कौन सी कोर्ट्स आती है? मजिस्ट्रियल कोर्ट्स आएगी जो जुडिशियल काम कर रही है, लेकिन जो जुडिशियल काम नहीं करती है, कोई एग्जीक्यूटिव मजिस्ट्रेट है, उनके काम भी जो होते हैं वो जब जुडिशियली एग्जामिन होते कर रहे होते हैं, तो उसके अंदर सेशन कोर्ट की जुरिसडिक्शन आती है. तो ये उसकी एक्सप्लेनेशन के अंदर कवर कर दिया गया है. इसके बाद सेक्शन 399 that is important to be examined. Session judge powers of revision. It says what are the powers of the session judge of revision. In the case of any proceeding, the record of which has been called for by himself, the session judge may exercise all or any of the powers which may be exercised by the High Court under subsection 1 of section 401. It begins with, in case of any proceeding, the record of which has been called for by himself. तो ये उसके ऊपर कंडीशन लगाई गई है कि जो रिकॉर्ड उसने खुद मंगवाया है. The session judge may exercise all or any of the powers which may be exercised by the High Court. Then वो जो रिकॉर्ड उसने खुद मंगवाया है, उस रिकॉर्ड के बेसिस के ऊपर वो रिविजनल पावर वही एक्सरसाइज करेगा जो हाई कोर्ट की. तो हाई रिविजनल पावर एक्सरसाइज करेगा जो हाई कोर्ट की है, सेम पावर एक्सरसाइज करेगा, लेकिन यहाँ पर कंडीशन प्रेसिडेंट क्या है? रिकॉर्ड उसने मंगवाया हो, which call he had called for. अब अगर ऐसी बात है, कमिटल ऑर्डर कर दिया मजिस्ट्रेट की कोर्ट ने, सेशन के पास केस भेज दिया, और जब सेशन के पास केस भेज दिया तो क्या वो जो जब ऑर्डर भेजा गया, फाइल भेजी जाती है तो ऑर्डर भेजा गया, तो ये तो अपने आप आ गया, इट वॉज नॉट कॉल्ड फॉर. तो ऑर्डर ऑफ कमिटल जो है उसको अगर रिवीजन करना हो उसका, इट इज लायबल टू बी टेकन टू रिविजनल ज्यूरिसडिक्शन. तो क्या वो कमिटल ऑर्डर को सेशन जज अपने रिवीजन पावर एक्सरसाइज कर सकता है? अगर हम इस सेक्शन को देखेंगे कि इन रेस्पेक्ट ऑफ द रिकॉर्ड कॉल्ड फॉर बाय द सेशन जज, वो कर सकता है, तो पूरी सिचुएशन के अंदर ये वाली पावर उसके पास नहीं है कि जो रिकॉर्ड उसके पास अपने आप आ गया, उसने कॉल फॉर नहीं किया, उसके अंदर वो रिविजनल ज्यूरिसडिक्शन एक्सरसाइज नहीं करता, क्योंकि यहाँ पर मैंडेट क्या है? उस सब्जेक्ट पर वो रिविजनल ज्यूरिसडिक्शन एक्सरसाइज करेगा जो रिकॉर्ड उसने मंगवाया है. सेक्शन 401 में जहां हाई कोर्ट की पावर दी जाती है, हाई कोर्ट्स पावर ऑफ रिवीजन, वहां पर स्पेशल लिखा गया है कि विच अदरवाइज कम्स टू इट्स नॉलेज. ये सेशन कोर्ट की पावर के ऊपर नहीं लिखा. सो दिस डिस्टिंक्शन वी हैव टू कीप इन माइंड. हालांकि आगे की लैंग्वेज जो है इसमें कई दफा हम लोग कंफ्यूज हो सकते हैं. वो क्या है? When the proceeding by way of revision is commenced before a session judge under subsection 1, the provisions of subsection 2, 3 and 4, 2, 3, 4 and 5 of section 401 shall, so far as may be applied to such proceeding, and reference in this said subsections to the High Court shall be construed as reference to session judge. So this is very clearly given in subsection 1 of 399 and subsection 2. Subsection 1 says powers of the High Court as exercisable under section 401, subsection 1 shall be exercised by it. Subsection 2, 3, 4, 5 of section 401 gives powers of the High Court then subsection 2 of section 399 says whatever is there in powers of high court in subsection 2, 3, 4 and 5 वो भी सेशन कोर्ट एक्सरसाइज करेगी। अब यहाँ पर देखिए एक बात और है, सबसेक्शन 1 को अलग लिखा गया है, सबसेक्शन 2, 3, 4 और 5 को अलग लिखा गया। तो सबसेक्शन 1 के ऊपर 399(1) के सबसेक्शन 1 में जो कंडीशन लगाई गई थी वो कंडीशन ऑपरेट करेगी। अगली बातें जो है सबसेक्शन 2, 3, 4 के बारे में वो कंडीशंस नहीं है, वो सीधा लिखा है जो पावर हाई कोर्ट एक्सरसाइज करेगी वो ये एक्सरसाइज कर लेगी। तो जो कंडीशन प्रेसिडेंट है सिर्फ उसी में फर्क है कि हाई कोर्ट उन बातों पर भी पावर एक्सरसाइज कर सकता है जो रिकॉर्ड उसने मंगवाया नहीं है, अदरवाइज कम्स टू इट्स नॉलेज। सेशन कोर्ट जो है उस पर करेगा जो रिकॉर्ड इसने मंगवाया है। ये एक बात है जो डिस्टिंक्शन हमको दिखाई देती है। आगे बात देखते हैं सबसेक्शन 3, where the application for revision is made by or on behalf of any person before the session judge, the decision of session judge thereon in relation to such person shall be final, and no further proceeding by way of revision at the instance of such person shall be entertained by the High Court or any other court. अभी साक्षी जी ने एक सवाल खड़ा किया था, क्या दोनों जगह पे रिवीजन, एक जगह पे सेशन कोर्ट में अगर हमारी रिवीजन डिसमिस हो जाती है तो क्या दूसरी रिवीजन लाई करती है कि नहीं करती है? ये सबसेक्शन 3 ने रिप्लाई दे दिया है कि that revision second revision does not lie once session court has decided in the revision. So that question stands answered. अब section 401 subsection 1 अब हमने देख लिया था। सेक्शन 399 का जो सेकंड पार्ट है वो क्या कहता है? फर्स्ट सबसेक्शन 1 का the session judge may exercise all or any of the powers which may be exercised by the High Court under subsection 1 of section 401. पावर तो एक्सरसाइज कर सकते हैं, लेकिन कब कर सकते हैं वो अपने आप को अभी ये बात बता दें। अब हम आगे सेक्शन 401 को देखते हैं। Second subsection, no order under this section shall be made to the prejudice of the accused or other person unless he has had the possibility of being heard either personally or by pleader in his own defense. तो कोई प्रेजुडिशियल ऑर्डर पास नहीं किया जा सकता किसी भी बंदे के खिलाफ जब तक उसको सुन न लिया जाए। सेक्शन 403 जो है ऑप्शन देता है कोर्ट को, हाई कोर्ट की मर्जी है सुने ना सुने, लेकिन अगर प्रेजुडिशियल ऑर्डर पास करना है तो ये सबसेक्शन 2 कहता है सुनना हो, बगैर सुने पास नहीं किया गया। अब सबसेक्शन 3, nothing in this section, it begins with nothing in this section shall be deemed to authorize High Court to convert a finding of acquittal into one of conviction. तो रिविजनल एक्सरसाइज जो है इस काम के लिए एक्सरसाइज नहीं की जा सकती कि ऑर्डर ऑफ एक्विटल हो गया है उसको कन्विक्शन में कन्वर्ट कर सकते हैं कि नहीं कर सकते। सो दिस इज अ बार, क्लियर बार गिवन बाय सबसेक्शन 3। अब सबसेक्शन 4 कहता है वेयर अंडर दिस कोड एन अपील लाइज एंड नो अपील इज ब्रॉट, नो प्रोसीडिंग बाय वे ऑफ रिवीजन शैल बी एंटरटेन्ड एट द इंस्टेंस ऑफ द पार्टी हु कुड हैव अपील्ड। अगर अपील कर सकते हैं, प्रोविजन अपील के अलाउ करते हैं कि अपील कर सकते हैं, किन केसेस में अपील नहीं हो सकती है? जहां कन्फेशन दिया गया हो, उस बेसिस पे कन्विक्शन के अगेंस्ट अपील नहीं होती है, सेंटेंस के अगेंस्ट अपील होती है, और पेटी ऑफेंसेस में अपील नहीं होती है। उसके अलावा अपील कर सकते हैं, अपील कर सकते थे फिर अपील नहीं किया है तो फिर रिवीजन डज नॉट लाई। अब कुछ क्वेश्चन अराइज होते हैं, कौन से ऑर्डर अपीलेबल है, कौन से ऑर्डर जो है उनके अगेंस्ट रिवीजन कर सकते हैं, कौन से ऑर्डर अपीलेबल है, मैंने आउटलाइन आपको अभी दे दिया। वी विल डील सब्सिक्वेंटली अपॉन द अपैरेंट ज्यूरिसडिक्शन, तो हम डिटेल में उसके अंदर बात करेंगे। तो रिवीजन जो है आगे अब देख ले, सेक्शन 402 कहता है पावर ऑफ हाई कोर्ट टू विड्रॉ और ट्रांसफर रिवीजन केसेस। अब ये कंकरेंट ज्यूरिसडिक्शन थी ना, तो मान लो एक से ज्यादा एक्यूज्ड है जिन पर एडवर्स ऑर्डर हुए हैं, किसी भी तरह के कोई ऑर्डर हुए हैं, एक चला जाता है सेशन कोर्ट में, दूसरा चला जाता है हाई कोर्ट के अंदर। उनकी मर्जी थी, जहां मर्जी जाए। अब पता लगता है हाई कोर्ट को कि कुछ एप्लीकेशन सेशन कोर्ट में डाली गई है, कुछ हाई कोर्ट में डाली गई है, तो क्या अलग अलग फैसले होते रहे? आपस में कॉन्ट्रडिक्टरी फैसले होने के चांसेस हो सकते हैं। तो फिर हाई कोर्ट के पास पावर दे दी गई है सेक्शन 402 कि या तो वो उसके अपने पास भी जो रिवीजन फाइल हुई है उसको भी सेशन को मार्क कर दे, या सेशन के पास जो है उसको कॉल फॉर कर ले और अपने पास करके सुनवाई करे। तो ये डिस्क्रिप्शन हाई कोर्ट के पास अवेलेबल है। हाई कोर्ट डिसाइड कर सकती है कि सेशन इसको डिसाइड करे या इसको हाई कोर्ट डिसाइड करे। जो डिस्टिंक्शन ऊपर 401 और 399 और 397 में जैसे मैंने बताई थी, हाई कोर्ट कब कर सकती है और सेशन कब कर सकती है, वो एक अलग बात है। यहाँ पर बात आती है जब दो तरफ एप्लीकेशन डाल दी गई है। अब नेक्स्ट सेक्शन जो है इसका सब सेक्शन, whenever an application for revision is transferred to the High Court, that court shall deal with the same as if it were an application made duly before it. Whenever an application for revision is transferred to the sessions, that judge shall deal with the same as if it were made before it. So इससे फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा अगर सेशन वाली हाई कोर्ट में मंगवा ली जाती है या हाई कोर्ट वाली सेशन कोर्ट में भेज दी जाती है, तो उनको डील इसी तरह से की जाए as if it had been filed before it. Fourth, the application for revision is transferred by the High Court to the Session Court. No further application for revision shall lie to the High Court or to any Session Court. जो पहले बात कही गई है कि second revision will not lie, यहाँ पर भी फिर कह दी गई है second revision will not lie. एक बार revision decide हो गया, second revision उस बात के ऊपर नहीं आएगा। Section 403, as I just told you earlier, it gives save as otherwise expressly provided by this code. No party has the right to be heard either personally or through pleader. So in case of revision, personally or by pleader, before any court exercising its power of revision, but the court may, if it thinks fit, then exercise such power, hear any party either personally or by pleader. तो any party को hear करने का मतलब है जिसने एप्लीकेशन डाली है उसको भी सुन सकता है, उसके अलावा दूसरी पार्टी को भी सुन लेगा। बोथ द कोर्ट्स के पास ये ऑप्शन अवेलेबल है। और अब हम देखेंगे सेक्शन 397 का सेकंड, द प्रोविजन ऑफ रिवीजन कन्फर्म्ड बाय सबसेक्शन 1 shall not be exercised in relation to any interlocutory order. एक क्वेश्चन मैडम साक्षी ने पुट किया था, whether it can be revision lies against interlocutory orders or not. सबसेक्शन 2 बड़े क्लियरली कह रहा है कि उसका आंसर तो सबसेक्शन 2 दे देता है, कोई इंटरलोक्यूटरी ऑर्डर के अंदर रिवीजन डजंट लाई। अब हम डील करेंगे व्हाट आर इंटरलोक्यूटरी ऑर्डर्स, कौन से ऑर्डर्स इंटरलोक्यूटरी होते हैं, कौन से ऑर्डर इंटरलोक्यूटरी नहीं होते। अगर ये हमको समझ में नहीं आएगा तो हम इसके अंदर फंस जाते हैं। इंटरलोक्यूटरी ऑर्डर क्या होते हैं और क्या कौन से ऑर्डर जो है इंटरलोक्यूटरी नहीं होते हैं, इसका टेस्ट है एक सीधा सा। कोई ऐसा ऑर्डर हो जिससे प्रोसीडिंग खत्म हो जाएगी, बंद हो जाएगी, फाइनल ऑर्डर ट्रीट कर लिया जाएगा, प्रोसीडिंग भी कंक्लूड हो जाएगी, तो वो तो साफ नजर आता है वो इंटरलोक्यूटरी ऑर्डर नहीं हो सकता, वो फाइनल ऑर्डर हो गया, इट कंक्लूड्स द प्रोसीडिंग इटसेल्फ, उसको फाइनल ऑर्डर हम नहीं कहेंगे। तो कुछ एग्जांपल हम डील करते हैं इंटरलोक्यूटरी ऑर्डर्स के। इंटरिम कस्टडी अंडर सेक्शन 451, 451 सेक्शन जो है वो प्रॉपर्टी की इंटरिम कस्टडी देता है। जब कोई डिस्प्यूट होता है, कोई क्रिमिनल केस चल रहा है, प्रॉपर्टी किसको दी जानी चाहिए, किसके पास रखी जानी चाहिए इंटरिम मेजर के हिसाब से, तो 451 डील करता है। तो ये अगर किसी थर्ड पार्टी को दी गई या वो जो पार्टीज बीच में इन्वॉल्व है उसको दी गई, उसके अंदर डिफरेंस आ जाता है। इंटरिम ऑर्डर जो है का जो ये ऑर्डर होता है कस्टडी का, इट इज इंटरलोक्यूटरी ऑर्डर, रिवीजन लाइज अगेंस्ट इट, बट it is not interlocutory order where it is given to third party. Third party is not part of the proceedings. So as far as third party is concerned, qua third party वो matter over हो गया है। तो इसलिए when it is a question of third party, it is not treated as interlocutory order. So if, because it is not interlocutory order in that situation, revision will lie in that case. I had earlier told about this, that the committal order, it is interlocutory order. AIR 2004, Supreme Court 2282. Very clearly said, the committal order is interlocutory order. I had said, if the committal order has been passed, it will not be looked into suo motu. Now, but where the question is about bail. Grant of bail is also interlocutory order. But where bail has been granted erroneously. If we can show that the bail ought not to have been granted, but it has been granted erroneously, just contrary to law, bail was not to be given. There are some special laws where it is said that what circumstances bail can be given, what circumstances bail cannot be given. Now, in certain special laws, bail cannot be given without giving notice to the prosecutor. But if the court gives bail without giving notice to the prosecutor, it could not have been given. So in that situation, this order of grant of bail, revision will lie against that. 1977 Supreme Court 2185. रिमांड ऑर्डर, पुलिस आई, पुलिस ने रिमांड मांगा, उसको रिमांड मिल गया. रिमांड ऑर्डर इज एन इंटरिम ऑर्डर, प्रोसीडिंग कंक्लूड नहीं हो रही. These are some of the examples which I have given you. Now I will be giving you the examples of the orders which are not interlocutory. Issuance of process or taking of cognizance. Taking of cognizance, proceedings then go thereafter. Right? But despite that, it is not treated as interlocutory order because it affects the rights of the persons concerned straight away. Then, issuing of process. It is not interlocutory order. It is not treated as interlocutory order. 1999, Supreme Court 1028. Framing of charge. Revision lies against this. Charge frame ho gaya. We can go and challenge this. It is not an interlocutory order. Order altering the charge. There are provisions where charge can be altered. So if our charge has been, after having been framed earlier, this order is also not final order, we can go against this order. It does not conclude the proceedings finally, so we can go against this under the revision. Then, order in application to section 311 or section 203. Under 311, we call for some witnesses. We want to show to the court something. If an order has been passed rejecting the application, it affects certain persons, might affect certain persons, interests of certain persons. And if it is allowed, it might affect the interests of certain persons. So whether it is allowed or it is not allowed, we can go against this order. Section 203, just as I said, question of issuing process or taking cognizance, we can go against that. Now, under section 203, dismissal is barred. The complaint which is filed cannot be dismissed. It can only be rejected. Because dismissal would mean proceedings have taken place and it has been examined on merits. So since just at the level of 203, it is not examined on merits, so dismissal is barred. It can only be rejected. Any order passed under section 125 for maintenance, revision lies in that case. In the proceedings of section 138 of Negotiable Instrument Act, when final order is passed, the revision lies there. Issues of summons, revision would lie there. Now, order passed under section 319 of CRPC. Arraying somebody is accused who was not earlier arrayed as accused, calling that party. So this order is not interlocutory order. It will go, we can go against this. Granting of pardon. Against this also revision lies. So these are some of the examples where there is an interlocutory order and where there is one Sheetala Prasad case. I must deal when it comes to the situation where the revision. Question arises whether revision can be filed or not by the complainant. Some orders have been passed and the complainant stands affected by that order, whether rejecting or dismissing. In both the situations, what are the conditions laid down? In Sheetala Prasad versus Shrikant, Honorable Supreme Court had laid down 5 conditions which have to be fulfilled before revision could be exercised by the complainant. What are those 5 conditions? When some order is passed, wrongly shutting out the evidence. Some evidence was to be given, it had been offered to be given, it was wrongly shut out. Evidence was going on, it was wrongly shut out. Some order is wrongly brushed aside. While examining the things, some order just brushed aside, not taken into account. Jurisdictional error. Supposing a complaint is there before one magistrate who didn't have the jurisdiction to consider this and pass any order. If such a court happens to pass the order, it will be a jurisdictional order. It is liable to be this revisional jurisdiction to be considered with that. Material evidence overlooked. While passing the orders, material evidence has been overlooked. Some irrelevant evidence has been taken into account. Last condition is on the basis of compounding, acquittal has been given. Where compounding did not lie. So these 5 are the conditions. If any of these conditions is met, private complainant can go for revision, can exercise the option of going for revision of the order, whatever order it may be. This was decided by the Honorable Supreme Court. It has been reported in AIR 2010, Supreme Court 1140. These are the issues which concerned us, largely speaking, in the matter of revision. And as far as exercise of revision is concerned, we have dealt with the situation, largely speaking. There can be more and more examples. There is endless things of the examples, but the concepts we have dealt with, and I think the participants and others have understood about these concepts, the difference between the powers of the High Court and the Sessions Court, and what powers can be exercised by both of them. This I have laid down, and also questions which was raised by Madam Sakshi, that what are the interlocutory orders and how are interlocutory orders going to be dealt with, that also I have dealt with. And I will give you one example. one more example, when any revision in High Court is dismissed on the ground of limitation, High Court can exercise power of revision suo motu. High Court revision application was preferred. High Court dismissed the revision application on the grounds of limitation. Now, thereafter, suo motu, how will suo motu, the High Court will take this suo motu? Maybe an application of section 482 of CRPC is filed. High Court is asked to exercise its inherent jurisdiction. So in that situation, High Court can suo motu take up the revision. Otherwise, when it was announced in the open court that it said dismissed, but while signing the order, something else occurs to the mind of the judge. After signing that order also, he can suo motu say, take up this revision. So this is a special situation, and this decision has been taken. Municipal Corporation of Delhi versus Dharinal Sapuru, AR 1981, Supreme Court 1169. So this is very interesting situation. That is why I thought that I must bring it to your notice. Another one more thing which I would like to give to you is, when parent makes out prima facie case in proceeding instituted against partnership firm, and all the partners or some of the partners have also been arraigned as accused. Managing partners' death takes place. Now, if such kind of proceeding is stated to have been abated, the revision would lie against such kind of things, because other partners were made liable in that. So this is also where revision would lie after the case is abated, although the managing partner has died. Now, this was so decided in the case of drug inspector versus BKA Krishnamaiah, AR 1981, Supreme Court 1164. So these are some of the examples which were relevant to be dealt with. I have dealt with those examples, and with this, I will thank all of you who have spared so much of time, the participants and the other persons who chose to hear all these. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Bharat sir.
so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Please.
Bharat
मिलते हैं
sir,
सर नेक्स्ट वेबिनार में.
थैंक यू वेरी मच सर. थैंक यू भारत सर. आपका सेशन
Thank
बड़ा
you, Shakti.
बड़ा इंफॉर्मेटिव सेशन रहता है. आई होप every viewer of this webinar will get benefited with the same. Thank you, sir.
Yes, definitely, sir. ठीक है सर. Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir, for decoding the law in such an informative way for all of us. Sir, it is always pleasure listening to you. It is like a fluid. When we start listening to you, we never realize now the session is concluded finally. I thank both our speakers for decoding the law for all of us. Thank you so much. It is out of lot of efforts and collaboration that we are trying to bring this webinar for all of you. Our objective is to create revolution of knowledge. पर ये तब तक पूरा नहीं होगा जब तक हम अकेले चलते रहेंगे. हमें आप लोगों का साथ चाहिए, क्योंकि जब हम साथ चलेंगे, that time we will be able to create revolution, क्रांति of knowledge. जब आपको information मिले, तो आप अपने colleagues, अपने groups, अपने friends के साथ इसे share करें. This will redefine the legal fraternity for the society. This objective of the bar is to spread knowledge, to spread knowledge to the maximum members of our legal fraternity. जब आप इसको आगे शेयर करेंगे, तब हम इस ऑब्जेक्टिव को पूरा कर पाएंगे. We thank all our viewers for sharing so much love, but we request to give more love, to spread this, to spread among all the members so that we can benefit, so that all the members can take benefit from the knowledge that we want to share by way of these webinars. We have all 3 more webinars lined up on 29 August, 5th September, 12th September. We request you to join in large numbers. Stay safe, stay tuned, subscribe to our channel, click the bell icon, subscribe to the Facebook page of Rouse Avenue Bar Association so that you get all the information, all the updates. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you.